Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and try to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic podcasts here on the YouTube platforms. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get right into today's episode. Now, I think today is going to be a relatively shorter one. I gave you guys 40 minutes back to back the last two episodes, kind of in pure, passionate Orlando Magic form. And I'm not going to lie, this episode, not too many things to talk about given the fact that it was a relatively short weekend, only one game since the last episode, and not too much to really build off of, just some positive signs in the right direction for a team that's been able to put together two big wins after starting the season 1-4. With that being said, I think the thing that stood out to me the most, at least in these last two games, is that this team is starting to figure out a little bit more what the balance is in terms of playing faster while being more effective offensively. And a lot of that has to do with being impactful on the defensive end. Obviously, that's the bread and butter of this Orlando Magic team, has been the bread and butter of this Orlando Magic team since Jamal Mosley became the head coach. Paired with this team putting more emphasis on causing turnovers, creating turnovers, and operating in transition that way, as opposed to trying to simply play faster and generate earlier in the half court off the inbound. This team can generate its offense in the transition game more off of what they do defensively, creating steals, operating off deflections, block shots into the open court, allowing for guys to catch the defense off guard, things of that nature, where their defensive tenacity pairs with their want to play more up tempo, and that being the middle ground between a team that wants to play fast versus a team that operates best when they utilize their size and utilize their impact as a paint touch team. A quote that I heard over the weekend after Saturday's game was from Jamal Mosley saying, "The pace is our defense getting stops to get out and run. As we continue to get stops, we can continue to get out and run. Half of the second and third quarter was our stops to get out and run. It was not just that we were trying to go at breakneck speed. It was we were trying to get stops and convert offensively." And I think that's really important because this team, on average, is getting a shot up around the 17-second mark on the shot clock on average so far this season, which is top half of the league. And that has a lot to do with this team trying to operate so much in terms of getting the ball up the floor off the inbound as quickly as possible and trying to create an offensive action as early in the shot clock as humanly possible. 7 seconds or less style for people who are familiar with that OG version of the Phoenix Suns led by Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire. The difference, and something that we talked about last episode, is that this team does not have the kind of point guard that enables you to be able to push the pace off the inbound where you create this transition style while not necessarily needing to catch the ball off a rebound, push it in transition, and get it that way. This is not the Indiana Pacers where, for example, whether it's Ben Mathurin, Andrew Nembhard, Tyrese Halliburton when healthy, right? That's three different guys who have the ability to push the pace the minute they get the ball off the inbound, bring the ball up court, make a decision with the ball. Mainly Andrew Nembhard and Tyrese Halliburton, if we're talking about making a decision early in the shot clock with the intention to pass. And they have athletes, your Ben Mathurins, Obi Toppins. TJ McConnell is not necessarily an athlete, but he's a springy player. He's a twitchy player in terms of how he moves in transition. Pascal Siakam is one of the best transition forwards in the NBA, has been that way for the last couple of years. They have the personnel that allows them to take the ball off the inbound and simply create transition simply by attacking early and often in the shot clock. Our offense is not built that way, starting with the lack of a point guard who helps with pushing the pace in that way, with the fact that we don't necessarily have a passer who can get the action started early in the shot clock to beat the defense that way, and more so, it's also just not really our style, built off the fact that our group is built mainly out of rangy, rangy wings, right? Rangy, oversized or taller, I guess you could say, wings, right? We are running out lineups with 6'7" Anthony Black, 6'7" Tristan Da Silva, 6'10" Paulo Banchero, 6'8", 6'9" Franz Wagner, right? We're running out these. Wendell Carter Jr. is, 6'10", 6'11", 7-foot-ish, right? Like, we're running out jumbo package lineups. See, a lot of the things that usually come with adopting a high up-tempo offense usually has more to do with also running a offense that has real pace and space as far as the lineup's construction, which usually means that's a fancy way of saying you usually are running a small ball lineup. You're usually running a small ball lineup. Indiana's most effective pace lineups, when you're talking about what they were able to do in transition, typically had something to do with Tyrese Halliburton at the 1. Andrew Nembhard is a three-point shooter. Obi Toppin is an athlete finisher around the rim, right? You have Ben Mathurin, athlete finisher around the rim. Or you have another pass catcher / ball mover / three-point shooter in Andrew Nembhard, right? You position yourself where you have one of two archetypes on the floor next to your push the pace point guard. Knockdown three-point shooter that can get the ball off the catch in transition and fire at will. So you're looking at guys that are 37+% from beyond the arc off the catch and shoot. Or you're looking for the rim runner athlete, right? This is your Obi Toppin. This is your John Collins, right? Those type of guys where the idea is off the inbound. Let's go ahead and push the ball up the floor. Let's try to see if we can get a P&R early in the shot clock with a rim roll where we can throw this ball up off the pick and roll to the athlete and see him finish around the rim or get contact and draw a foul early in the shot clock, because everything is scrambling from the P&R action happening at the 20 or the 20, well, more realistically, it's like either the 19-20 range in the shot clock, right? Because if we're at 24, realistically, if you're able to get the ball up within 4 seconds, get a P&R active, and then by the 18, 17 second mark, you're in the middle of your alley-oop action, you've now created a half-court shot within the first 7 seconds of the shot clock. That is because of the personnel that has a point guard that pushes the ball up the floor, high-level decision maker with the ball as a passer, pick and roll threat where you have the opportunity for that point guard to be someone that essentially the defender has to pick their poison, typically in the case of that point guard being a threat from beyond the arc, which means you have to slip over the screen as a defender, as the point guard defender, which puts more pressure on the big that's defending the roll man to now have to try to catch himself back as the roll is activated, which puts him in a precarious situation, puts him in a bad spot where he now has to either be wary of the hezzy fake into the drive because now the point guard is chasing because he went over screen. Now he's chasing. Now you have to be wary of the hezzy into drive, or you have to now tag the roller, follow him in hopes that he doesn't get an alley-oop right over your head and dunks, right? I hope that's not too nuanced for anybody in this podcast. I'm sure it's heck not trying to act like I'm some kind of like NBA coach / X's and O's superhero or something like that. But that's a very simple action, very simple pick and roll action early in the shot clock that different teams with that kind of archetype can lean into. Our Orlando Magic team cannot do that. Paulo Banchero had 9 assists in a game where he really was getting a lot of teammates into the flow of things in the first half, putting them in catch and shoot opportunities. These were not things where he was bringing the ball up the court, observing the defense, making the decision and pick and roll at the top of the key, and making a good pass that opened up the floor. It was the thing that makes Paulo Banchero the most dangerous. He gets the ball in the mid-post, low-post area, dribbles, makes decision, typically leads to typically in the sense of getting an assist, leads to a kick opportunity. And then that player either fires from where they're at or they re-dribble into a quick decision that allows them to get an easier shot. So we don't have a true facilitator to get that done. So how do you get it done in a more Orlando Magic way? Let's get back to that. The offensive strides of playing faster spawn from defensively creating deflections, forcing more turnovers. This team is averaging 17 forced turnovers a game, right? And that's really solid for them because if they're causing a significant amount of turnovers, remember, the first handful of games, the biggest thing I kept harping on outside of them getting whooped on in the paint, was this team is getting a lot better at scoring in the paint and have been the most effective when scoring in the paint. The other thing is scoring off of turnovers. This team needs to be able to take advantage of forcing turnovers by using the guys they have athletically, size-wise, to put pressure on the rim after getting a rebound. This team should not be hyper-focused on creating drive and kick opportunities off a deflection, drive and kick opportunities off a block into the open floor where now someone's able to pick it up. You got a 2-on-3 or a 3-on-2 or a 2-on-1 scenario, and you're worried about kicking the ball out to a three-point shooter. No. Put pressure on the rim. Put pressure on the rim early, often, and as much as humanly possible off of those turnovers, because it also creates a disadvantage for the defense in the sense of now, because of the scramble drill that's taking place, you are much more likely to force the defense to foul if you are to go to the rim as opposed to if you spray out to the three-point line. Actually, in a lot of senses, especially when you don't have an effective three-point shooter on the floor consistently, which Desmond Bane has not been that consistently throughout this year so far, and guys like Anthony Black and Tristan Da Silva are not trusted to be knocked down three-point shooters just yet. They are developing into it. They've looked good from beyond the arc so far, at least decent. But they're not trusted three-point shooters just yet. So it allows the defense to almost recompartmentalize themselves in transition, because you don't necessarily have to go out and tag that guy as bad because you don't view him as this three-point threat. As opposed to Anthony Black, Tristan Da Silva, Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, the ability to put pressure on the rim, the ability to finish around the rim, the ability to get to the paint consistently, that's the bread and butter of this team. So now when you have to scramble back in that situation and you're worried more about a paint touch, you're also more likely to foul amongst all the hoopla. So that was something I thought was just kind of really notable. This team is still, this again, one game over the weekend, and it was really a get back game in the sense of playing still a very youthful Washington Wizards team where Alex Sarr is still learning to be a high level rim protector. Like, he is a good rim protector, all things considered, but like this is not some elite level rim protector that the Orlando Magic had to worry about, and it kind of showed with their ability to get kind of anything they wanted in the paint, relatively speaking, in this game. I mean, this was a blowout where they scored, 62 points in the paint, 17 points off of turnovers, 13 steals, 32 assists. That's another step up from that Charlotte Hornets game. I believe I said that was the highest of the season so far was 29, 32 in this game, 62 rebounds, huge, right? So, and got to the free throw line 22 times. Like, this team is just much more effective getting to the rim and essentially defense to offense. Defense to offense is the thing that's going to make this team special because they're already so elite at playing passing lanes and being effective forcing turnovers. This team, in terms of offense, now is just more about being able to convert off of those first forced turnovers and, honestly, getting consistent three-point shooting in the half court. Like, Paolo's been solid. Franz has been solid. Like, when Franz leads the team in minutes, they've won every single time. Like, when Franz plays, like, over 35 minutes a game, they've been lethal. right? Like Franz has been good, and I think Franz fits more as a point forward, fits better as a point forward than Paolo. I think the assist numbers would suggest differently. That would make the assist numbers make Paolo seem like a much more effective playmaker in the half court than he actually is. It's not that he's a negative playmaker by any means, but it's much different getting your assists off of drive and kick or post up and kick 3-point shooting opportunities than it is truly playmaking off the top of the key as the point forward. I think that's where Franz Wagner fits a little bit more. So that's just kind of a little interesting nugget to keep in mind of, is that this team without Jalen Suggs consistently in the lineup has seen a lot more of the playmaking come from their two main forwards. And I'm not surprised by that. They need to get it from somewhere. And those two guys just have the upside to really be able to do it in a real way. Let's talk about something that I think is kind of interesting. And it's obviously a developing story. But John Morant was recently suspended for one game, this most recent game against the Toronto Raptors, for some interesting comments in relation to the new coaching staff for the Memphis Grizzlies, in which John Morant is having like career lows across the board right now through 6 games. And although this Orlando Magic team is in a very interesting spot financially, their names came up when the phrase disgruntled superstar John Morant was mentioned. Orlando was one of the first teams that was mentioned, along with, I believe, like the Memphis Grizzlies, the Toronto Raptors, the Phoenix Suns next to Devin Booker. There's a handful of teams that were named when you hear the phrase disgruntled superstar guard John Morant. The next thing that comes to mind was push the pace point guard Orlando Magic. And I don't blame anybody for viewing it this way because, for example, in the last video, one of the comments in the comment section said, "Call up the San Antonio Spurs about De'Aaron Fox ASAP." And I was like, you know what? Fit-wise, that's not that crazy. And from a trading perspective, because De'Aaron Fox is an expiring contract, it wouldn't necessarily be the craziest thing for him to be able to trade for him, because they wouldn't have to give up too high of a commodity. Yes, you'd probably have to separate yourself from one of either Jalen Suggs or Anthony Black potentially, but you'd probably need to do that anyway, just from a depth perspective. If I'm Orlando, I'd probably take a look more at moving off of Jalen just because of the injury concerns, but I also know what Jalen means for our team defensively. So you can kind of reprise from that. It depends on how you want to look at it, right? You can choose what you think. Like I mentioned beforehand, episode or two ago, that maybe Anthony Black in the starting lineup and having Jalen Suggs come off the bench while he continues to kind of rehab his situation might be a smart idea, because Anthony Black's playing really well so far, right? That can maybe skew who you believe is more expendable. I think John Morant, for this Orlando Magic team, I think John Morant is actually a much better fit than De'Aaron Fox, because he puts so much pressure on the rim. So much. I think even with how fast De'Aaron Fox is, I think John Morant is so much more effective as a rim pressure guard, especially because of how dangerous he can be in that mid-range area. Paired with the fact that dudes just fear the mere fact of getting put on a poster, because he is a much more destructive finisher around the rim. Like, I think you can make the argument for saying that De'Aaron Fox is a more effective or more efficient finisher around the rim, but I think John Morant is much more destructive, puts much more fear in a rim protector's heart as a finisher, especially in transition. Pair that with the fact that I think most would say Ja is much better as a high IQ passer, which again gives you that Indiana feel of trying to push the pace in a real way that forces offense to click in a more early portion of the shot clock, create mismatches that way. And again, he puts so much pressure on the rim that you have to respect him, where, again, in that guard action, you might more likely go under on Ja than over, because as much as you might not respect him as a three-point shooter. Going under makes you makes you at least safer for the blow by, because we know that he has that quick first step ability to get to the rim and be a danger there, right? So Ja Morant is an interesting fit. The trade package that was put together is the Orlando Magic would send the Grizzlies Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, which I think this is the part that makes it a little rich because you have to get rid of both of them. Yes, you reunite him with Desmond Bane, and we still do have Tyus, but then that forces Jace to be like much more featured within the lineup, and also you lose all your defense from the backcourt by doing this, right? But it's Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, a 2026 first round pick, 2032 first round pick, and both 2026 second round picks for Ja Morant. Okay, again, you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you feel about that trade package. Me personally, I'm not super crazy about it because of having to give up both Jalen Suggs and Anthony Black. I think if you can get away with Jalen Suggs and Jet Howard, or Jalen Suggs and Jonathan Isaac, or if you can do some semblance of like Jalen Suggs and I don't really want to give up Goga, but I think that's really the only other player left, right, that really fits, because I'm not giving up Tristan. I'm not giving up Jace. They're not taking Tyus back in that scenario, I don't think. I know Jalen Suggs, in a sense, almost kind of has to be a part of it because Ja Morant's contract is so lucrative, because he does have like a escalating contract that's like around 27, to 30 plus million a year, escalating. So I know that Jalen Suggs kind of has to be in it to make the money work. But if you can get away with Jalen Suggs and Jonathan Isaac, or Jalen Suggs and Jet Howard and those picks instead of Anthony Black, I think that's much better. But giving away both of your high-level defensive guards in that transaction, you really kind of fluff out the guard depth you just built back up. Now, yes, you get the familiarity of Ja Morant and Desmond Bane playing next to each other once again. They're both high-level ball handlers. They both know how to play next to each other, paired with having Paolo and Franz still on the roster. You can make an adjustment at your center position with Wendell Carter Jr. We'll talk about him in a different episode because I was going to talk about him today, but maybe he gets brought up in the fan comments. But other than that, I don't have a ton to say about Wendell, again, off of one game. But you guys just let me know in the comment section down below. How do you guys feel about the idea of Ja Morant on this team? Let's say you trade. Let me spruce the trade up. I think a lot of people would agree that Jalen Suggs and Anthony Black in this trade is just like not really like beneficial for the Orlando Magic, even if you are getting Ja Morant. So let's say it's Jalen Suggs. Let's say it's Jalen Suggs and Jonathan Isaac, because Jet Howard feels like a little bit more of a cheat code in terms of like that being some kind of like a dump off. Jonathan Isaac is contract controlled as well. Same thing as Jalen Suggs. And then let's say maybe because Jonathan is so much more bad money, you still have to keep these draft picks attached, right? Now, maybe Memphis would have to throw in someone else, but it could be someone a little bit lower down the totem pole. I don't have an exact trade drawn up, but let's say it's Jalen Suggs, Jonathan Isaac, first round picks, and a first round pick or two, and a second round pick or two for Ja Morant. Do you do that as the Orlando Magic? I think when you start bringing up names like De'Aaron Fox, when the LaMelo Ball stuff is brought in, right? When you think about this whole playing in a more up-tempo offense, you have to ask yourself, what guards around the league actually fit the bill? Because truth be told, Jalen Suggs does not fit that bill. We love him. We love him as a defensive guard on this team. Yes, he is the closest thing to Drew Holiday we have in the modern era as far as this next generation of NBA guards. Sure. But as far as trying to play this way, if this is what we're doing, and again, that's the key to all of this. If the up-tempo offense is what we plan on doing, even if the philosophy, as I said earlier in the podcast, should be built more off of what you do in defense to force transition, if the game is built off of trying to play more up tempo, you have to get a guy who puts that kind of pressure on opposing defenses where they are forced to have to pick their poison in an open run situation, right? Whether that's off a rebound, off a deflection, off of a block into the open floor. You have to be weary of that guard being both a downhill threat and or a high level facilitator in that action. And John Morant does fit that. Now, it's funny, though, because in Memphis, that's kind of the style they're playing now. And he seems to not be like the craziest big fan of it. So that's its own real dilemma. But again, he's hooking up back with his boy Desmond Bane in a different location under different circumstances. So maybe that helps soften the blow because that backcourt seemed to be very close. So yeah, you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about a Ja Morant trade scenario with the Orlando Magic. Last but not least, and I'm going to make this one relatively quick, read some of the comments from last video. One of them from Carlos Diaz 8907 says, Stephen A. Smith, who? My friend, I've been following you for some months and I'm impressed with your knowledge since when you became a Magic fan. You are on point every episode. Thank you for your excellent work. Keep it up, sir. You have a fan in Puerto Rico. Go Magic. First of all, appreciate you from Puerto Rico. Thank you so much, Carlos. Actually, believe it or not, full transparency, I am not directly an Orlando Magic fan. For those who are not able to see in the podcast, I am actually a long-time Chicago Bulls fan. Not really from the Michael Jordan era. I was born in 98, so it was one of those time frames where I caught the back end of it. I'm just a super Derrick Rose fan, but I've always told people that I've kept a lot of close watch of the Orlando Magic because, as Orlando Magic fans know, the Bulls kind of have inadvertently helped build the last 3 to 4 years of the Orlando Magic. Things like the Vucevic trade, that helped create the Franz Wagner scenario. And obviously, we've been in conversation with the Orlando Magic a million times in mock trades that send Kobe White to the Orlando Magic, Zach LaVine to the Orlando Magic. I've seen so many different scenarios in which the Orlando Magic and the Chicago Bulls have worked in tandem that I've always made the joke that I'm kind of by proxy an Orlando Magic fan when the Chicago Bulls aren't doing well. Funny enough, so far to start the year off, they're kind of on two totally different ends of the spectrum right now. But yeah, I've always really kind of, at least I'm going to say over the last 4 to 5 years, I've paid more attention to the Orlando Magic as of late than I ever did before because the Orlando Magic and the Bulls just are constantly in cahoots, it feels like. And by proxy, it's like I get to see players that the Chicago Bulls could have had they positioned themselves in a different way and things of that nature. Play on an Orlando Magic team that I do think in reality is building towards something special. I think they've missed on a couple of draft picks here and there. I think the Jet Howard pickup was obviously, a fall through the ground. I think that the Chuma Okeke thing was something that I think could have been anticipated given his injury history back at Auburn. Like there are certain things where I definitely believe the Orlando Magic have flopped on certain decisions. But at the same time, I feel like they have really utilized their resources, a good handful of them coming from the Bulls, to help them really put themselves in a better light and really build in the right direction coming off of those, Nikola Vucevic-led years where they were always finishing as like a top 6 seed but never really getting past the first round. So that's a lot of where the Orlando Magic knowledge, I guess you could say, has come from, is really this newer age of the Orlando Magic. And then some of the extra stuff is just more like trying my best to be a historian of the game. Boop Tuber says, yes, Jalon Bane. Yes, Jalen. I'm assuming he's referring to me. Yes, Jalen. Bane will lose his three-point abilities in Orlando, which is called the black hole for three-point shooters. There has never been anyone that escapes. KCP was the latest victim. The 2009 Magic team was the only team to escape this phenomenon. I mean, that would be a good explanation as to why this team has been so bad as an offense the last, decade plus. Like being a bottom level 3-point shooting team in the post Dwight Howard area basically kind of pencils you in as a bottom 10 offensive team, because the best teams in the NBA these days are high level 3-point shooting teams, whether that's strictly based off of volume or based off of efficiency, or of course the combination of the two. So if that's the truth, I mean, that spells really big trouble though, because that's kind of what they brought Desmond Bane in for. And if you traded that much for him just for him to lose his superpowers as a 3-point shooter, I mean, that really makes him quickly expendable. Now, maybe somebody else can receive the benefits of the 3-point shooting in a different environment, which maybe makes him still like a decent commodity on the trade block. But yeah, if Desmond Bane can't be the type of knockdown 3-point shooter he was in Memphis, I mean, like, what exactly do you do? Because I'm not saying he's still a good playmaker. I've mentioned that on the podcast plenty. He's still a good playmaker, and I think he's developing as a playmaker. But that 3-point shooting pressure that he puts on teams is what draws so much attention, which by proxy frees up guys like Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner as paint touchers. If he's not able to create that kind of threat, you're no different than Jalen Suggs. You're just a step low defensively and a bit better offensively as a shot generator. Like, at that point, you're not worth the kind of draft capital like that Orlando gave up. Some would argue he never was, but that he truly wouldn't be if he's only hitting, league average, if not below, from beyond the arc. Last comment for today, funny enough, kind of is in relation to something I said earlier on the podcast. Magic Stick 407. That feels like pause, so I'm going to say it anyway, but shout out to you. Suggs off the bench just to get right makes sense. And that was in reference to when I was saying that maybe Anthony Black should start for the next couple of weeks to help Jalen Suggs kind of go through a ramp-up process rather than just playing him on a pitch count. Just have him come off the bench and deal with second units, and allows him to kind of, settle a little bit more into being back on the floor. And then Darsam88. Oh, excuse me. The rest of that comment says, Point Paolo is a winning formula. More brawn, less mellow. Darsam88 responds by saying, I disagree with Point Paolo. At least at this moment, the ball tends to stop with him and he settles for tough shots a lot. I actually like Point Franz and think that way is a lot better if we're running point forward. Pearl Jam _1, who has been very active in my comments. Shout out to you, Pearl Jam, says 9 assists, bro. Okay, so a couple things. I did touch on this early in the podcast, so it makes it a little bit easier to kind of wrap up on this one. I think Paolo Banchero is a good decision maker with the basketball. Yes, the ball can stick with him. Paolo Banchero has Paolo Banchero has a lot of New York Knicks version of Julius Randle in him, where the ball can really stick with him in the half court. And from a decision-making standpoint, he tends to operate best where he's a facilitator in panic/fire alarm situations. What does that mean? So Paolo Banchero tends to be the best version of a facilitator when the defense is starting to really collapse in the late version of the shot clock. So once we start getting down to that 10, 9, 8, that kind of countdown late in the shot clock, that's when he can see the defense starting to kind of collapse into his late level contests, and then he makes good decisions with the basketball, right? Or he's very good at being able to make decisions off of drive and kick scenarios because he's such a physical body. He creates a lot of space with that bump off the drive, and it creates this vision for him now where he's able to see guys where he can spray out to a 3-point shooter, or he can see a baseline cutter cutting underneath and be able to dump that ball under for him to be able to get a finish or draw the foul that way, right? So Paolo is somebody that is best at creating shots for others via chaos, right? So that's why I think the point forward Franz scenario, actually, I agree with Darsam on this one, is I think a little bit more applicable because we saw even in Eurobasket, or more especially in Eurobasket, next to Dennis Schroeder, Point Franz, he is the closest thing I think on this team to that downhill push the pace off the inbound point guard that we can get. We saw in Eurobasket a ton Franz kind of creating transition basketball off the inbound by just being aggressive downhill from the minute he touched the ball. And I think that's something where you create a lot of chaos when you get a 6'9", 6'10" wing burrowing down court with 20 seconds on the shot clock early on. And the first action he goes into is, let me see if I can get a paint touch within the first 7 seconds of the shot clock. A 6'10" forward driving down court 94 feet with the intention of trying to get to the basket within 7 seconds of the shot clock creates so much of a collapsible force, right? Because the guard's not going to be able to stop that. The guard is not going to be able to get hold on that. And a forward or the center is going to have to step up for contest, which now creates a collapse, now creates a spray out opportunity, or again creates that other action where you have somebody hopefully with high basketball IQ, that when he sees Franz come downhill, someone from corner will see the side man collapse. He follows this, then the rim defender collapses down, tries to go for the contest, or comes to stop Franz in his tracks. Usually, if the big man has the cahoots to do it, to draw the charge, or to be the secondary contest next to the guard that's trying to stop ball. Franz makes a good decision, baseline cutter, boom. You know what I'm saying? Something of that ilk. So Franz, I think, actually is our best version of a point forward over Paolo Banchero. I think Paolo Banchero is a big-time passer in terms of making decisions when things get chaotic. But I think Franz has the best ability of anybody on this team as a ball handler, as a legitimate ball handler, both in transition and in the half court, to initiate offense, kind of with the intention of creating for others out the gate. Sometimes you have to be very careful about assists. Assists are not always indicative of being a high-level playmaker. Assists are more about being able to make good decisions to guys who convert in a particular way efficiently. If you have a knockdown catch-and-shoot shooter on your team and you constantly are a drive and kick demon, you are going to rack up assists because you have somebody that specializes in something that comes off of an action that you participate in frequently, for example. Or if you are a pick and roll merchant, you can get 4 or 5 assists a game off of a PNR action when you have a rim running center who's a high level finisher around the basket. Those are a couple of things. Anyway, this podcast ran a lot longer than I actually intended for. I hope you guys enjoy these podcasts every time I record them. This has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that post notifications bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And tomorrow we'll be talking about the upcoming game against the Atlanta Hawks without Trae Young. But until then, I'll see you guys later. Peace.